In today's day and age, when many who don't game hear the term video games, they may think of a generic, superficial, first-person shooter. Video games being a form of art may not even cross their minds. Or perhaps they may feel the same as one famously quoted individual who once said, "I wrote a blog post a while ago about why I hate video games, because this is what it does. It appeals to, like, the male fantasy." These opinions do carry weight. A culture has developed in the video game industry where developers are trying to make the next Halo, Call of Duty, and Fortnite. Also, admittedly, there are video games that feature very shallow, self-indulgent topics. However, let's say someone believed art was limited to caricature, and because they did not enjoy caricature, they dismissed all art. Wouldn't they be missing out? And just because literature and publications have been used as a vehicle for superficial and self-indulgent images, do we dismiss every work of art on a piece of paper because of it? Of course not. In the same way, just because a certain genre of video games have gained popularity does not mean the other genres don't exist. And just because some developers have used video games as a vehicle for something that many find offensive doesn't mean the whole industry focuses on superficial, self-indulgent topics. Now, there is also the timeless debate,
does video games cause violence?
And that's something we may discuss in a future video. But in this video, we'll take a look at how video games qualify as art in 3 generally accepted categories: form, representation, and expression. Now, like art itself, this video is subjective and debatable, but I hope more than a few people will agree with me. So first up, form. In art, form refers to 3-dimensional objects. And with the advent of the Nintendo 64 and Sony PlayStation in the mid-90s, 3D environments became the norm in video games. However, even before that, efforts were made to add form to game environments and characters. As early as 1981, developers accomplished this through isometric games and text adventures. Through in-game cutscenes, they could do a little more, but then in 1993 came Star Fox on the Super NES, which took form for video games to another level. And as the years passed, the depth and richness of 3D environments has improved by leaps and bounds. Hand in hand with form, though, is our second category, representation. For hundreds of years after the days of Greek philosopher Plato, the primary meaning of art was defined as the representation or replication of something that is beautiful or meaningful. And in similar priority, representation is probably the most obvious category in which video games have developed. The visual aesthetics of early games were virtually non-existent, with a simple interactive aspect to the game. But as time moved along, more development went into the aesthetic. This was especially so in role-playing games, or RPGs, where the player traveled through dense forests, blue oceans, and arid deserts. And we would be remiss if we did not point out action RPGs, such as The Legend of Zelda. These games emphasized fashion as well as function, and as technology developed, so did representation in video games, as they became more and more realistic. And while they introduced unrealistic, cartoony ideas and characters of a science fiction or fantasy nature, a showcase of new visual technology never failed to feature something beautiful about our planet that means something to us.
This is Namco's Tekken Tag Tournament. The models are more complex than ever before. The blades of grass can move individually in the wind. Watch how the light moves across the stone. You can't do this without substantial computing power. In Dark Cloud, an RPG from Sony Computer Entertainment, hair and cloth can move subtly.
Green grass, blue sky, water, even humanity itself, and how close to human a game character could actually look. One of the most notable among these is Square Enix's series Final Fantasy, With its 7th installment, it became a frontrunner in graphical development, and each installment from then on became more and more realistic. Nowadays, video games are more than capable of representation on a respectable level, so much so that some developers put too much stock in it. And finally, my personal favorite form of art, expression. An expression of what? Of emotional content, a definite feeling, intended to evoke an emotional response. A superficial view for gamers is that the primary emotion is anger. But over the years, video games have engaged so many other emotions through storytelling. The love of a father, the loyalty between childhood friends, betrayal, redemption, personal conflict, sacrifice. And who doesn't enjoy a good love story, or a tale of good versus evil, no matter how on the nose it may feel? What about concepts like post-apocalyptic, science and technology nearly causing the end of humanity? Once upon a time, long ago, in a kingdom far away, and the age-old chosen one prophesied to bring peace to the world. It is true that a lot of games feature stories and themes that would appeal to young people, and the older I get, the more I appreciate the role of the older mentor who tries to help the young protagonists realize their potential. But when it comes to emotions and expressions, who has more of that than young people? But looking a bit deeper into these stories, we find subtext, the lines between the lines. Playing a game may evoke a certain emotion by more subtle methods. The combination of colors, context, and music could lend themselves to feelings of isolation, loneliness, mortality, and grief. And speaking of music, that would be last but certainly not least on our topic. Music in games have stirred up feelings of urgency, loss, triumph, and celebration. And good quality music pieces in video games are not limited to modern AAA titles. Just listen to this theme from the 1990 NES game Solstice, released over 30 years ago. certainly, the connection between expression and video games is undeniable. So, what is the point of this video? Am I trying to argue for legal recognition of video games as an art form? No. Legal business is out of my wheelhouse. Am I justifying playing video games all day long? No. Just as I wouldn't justify spending all day every day at the nearest art museum. In fact, the best way to enhance your gaming experience is to live a full life. Spending time in nature and with people you love enhances gaming, because life is the source material of art. The purpose of this video is twofold. On one hand, video games are my favorite pastime, and I would like more people to see them as more than a superficial first-person shooter or an excuse to appeal to the male fantasy. I want people to see the men and women over the past 40-odd years who poured themselves into their art, using their game as a vehicle to express themselves through representation, music, and storytelling. I've never met them in person, so I'm not calling them role models, but I am calling them artists. On the other hand, art can influence us. Subtext can pull us, and evoking an emotional response can sway us. So for this reason, I strongly believe that a parent should take a keen interest in their child's video games. It may be convenient that kids are quiet while they sit in front of a screen, but what is the subject of representation? What is being expressed on the screen? What's happening behind the scenes in a young child's mind? Now, I'm not talking about online games. That's a whole other can of worms, and I would beg anyone not to let a young child play online unsupervised. You don't know who is on the other side playing with them and conversing with them. But many offline games are innocuous, and many children are not easily influenced by a game. But many other children are attuned to the artistic expressions. I love video games, so I wouldn't suggest getting rid of them, but I do suggest taking an interest. And who knows? While doing so, you may stumble across an art form within these games that appeal to you.